How's it going, everybody, and welcome to episode 168 of Master My Garden podcast. Now, this week's episode is a listener's question, and the question comes in from Christine Orford. And it's quite a long question, so just bear with me for a second. It's in relation to two water tanks that she's just after getting. So I'm a beginner gardener, and I've just sourced two old water tanks, and I would love to know what to plant up, but not sure where to start. Should I fill the bottom with old plastic pots to save on compost? What should I put in them? Open to trying anything. Love growing flowers and vegetables, but also tying with the idea of planting something for a little bit of screening. And there was a few little bits, more pieces of information. So there's outside, when you step out into the back garden, there's a seated area there, and there's a low wall to the left-hand side. And this is where she's looking for a little bit of screening. But she also says, which is interesting, she doesn't want to screen it too much because the next door neighbor gives her good gardening tips while she's out there. So we're not trying to screen it totally, but maybe a little bit of screening would be helpful. So yeah, lots there, lots of options. Christine also says that potentially there's a big job being done on the garden in the next year or two. And so she wants something obviously to look nice, but not necessarily to be super permanent. And I think that this is where we can, I suppose, get immediate benefit from these containers, but also have our eye on the long term as well, and the possibility that the garden will get, a makeover or an overhaul at some point in the very near future. And the fact that you're open to trying veg and flowers makes it interesting. And it'll be, I suppose, interesting to sort of marry the two together, and that's what we're going to try and do. So firstly, to describe these two water tanks that have been pre-used water tanks, one of them is about a meter cubed, so a meter in all directions, meter high, meter deep, meter wide, and it's a metal tank. So a good solid metal tank, about a meter size. So it's quite substantial, and you'll definitely be able to grow stuff in that, and quite a decent size. The other tank then is another water tank, but it's what they call a coffin water tank, which you would typically see up in the attic of houses. So it's 2 meters long and a meter high, and it's a water tank that, as I said, typically is found up in the attic. So they're both different materials for a start. So that's the first thing. So what can we put in here? Well, the very first part of your question was, should I fill the bottom with old plastic pots to save on compost? And what I'm going to say here is no, and I'll get into why in a minute, because we're going to use this planter for a lot of plants, and we're going to go with maximum impact. So we don't want to reduce necessarily the level of compost within that. We will maybe take out a couple of inches at the bottom. So we'll get into that now. So basically, I suppose, firstly, what we'd like to do is get the two tanks looking the same. So at the moment, they look quite different. One is metal, one is black. I think the metal one was orange in color, and obviously the black plastic one. So they look different. And if we're planting them up and we're going to place them quite close together, which we don't have to do, but my suggestion is that we might do that. If we're going to plant them up quite close together, then what we're looking at is, we're looking at two different textured materials. They're also going to be two different heights. So my suggestion here is twofold. Either on the sides that are facing, that are going to be visible, we either clad these with, some form of nice wood, and this can be as, economical or as expensive as you want. You can go down the route of getting little cedar battens, obviously, which will look beautiful. They'll be, and you can screen them off. So basically get the top level, get both of them to the same height at the top, and then screen them all around the outer face that you can see with some form of a cedar batten. And that will give it the look that it's all one container as opposed to two separate ones. If you don't want to go down that route, you can do it as simple as 2x1 lats painted with a nice stain, and you're going to get the same effect from much more economically. The fact that this is not necessarily a long-term job, and that the garden might change or will change over the coming years, might mean that, you know, we're going to do something here that could get taken out, and maybe in 2 years' time you decide that these 2 tanks no longer have a place within your garden. But what we do want to do is the plants that we're going to use inside of them, we're going to use these, or we're going to make sure that these are going to be able to be rehomed in this new garden plan over the next couple of years. So that would be my first suggestion, is get the 2 of them looking similar. In terms of positioning, I would be inclined to, obviously you mentioned a little bit of screening. So I would get these positioned to the left-hand side along that small wall, and have it so that the 2 of them look like they're the same height. You might have to build up underneath them with blocks to get them at the same level. And then, as I say, do the cladding around it. If you're not going to do the cladding around it, you could obviously paint the 2 of them the same color. You'd have to get a really good quality paint that would adhere to both plastic and to metal. That can be tricky. You'd have to get a really good quality paint and go to a good quality paint shop to ensure that you get the, you know, one that is going to work on both materials. The black plastic one is a kind of a shiny black plastic as well, so you'll have to get something that will adhere to that. But I think the original suggestion of getting the battens, so this is going to be 2x1 battens, running from the top to the bottom, flush with the top of the planters, and then your planters are propped up underneath with something, blocks or whatever, and that gives you the illusion that these are the same size, same height. They're slightly different depths as well, but that, you know, that won't matter. So your front face, they'll be kept level, and then you'll fill to the back. So screening, number one, that's the other thing. By raising up your planters, it's going to make that screening piece a little bit easier, because if you go low to the ground, both these tanks, they're not very high. So if you go low to the ground, the screening piece is going to be not difficult, but more difficult. But the higher you can raise it up at the start, the easier it is to get that little piece of screening done. Now, in terms of that screening, you like the neighbor and you love the advice that he's given you. So we're not looking to make it so obvious that we're creating a hard screen barrier here, like a hedge that's going to completely block out that area. So what we're looking to do is kind of soften that a little bit. And the fact that you're saying you want to grow veg and flowers means we're going to do a bit of a mix here. So we're probably going to look at growing veg, flowers, fruit and herbs all in these 2 little planters, which seems like a lot in 2 small planters, and it is, but we can do that, and we can leave it so that all of these plants can be moved into the garden proper then whenever this, redevelopment or this new garden design happens over the next couple of years. The other thing that you can do, if you're going to go to the trouble of cladding up these and making them look really good now, maybe these planters can continue as part of the garden, so maybe have an eye, even though you might not plan to do the actual work on the garden now, but maybe have a little bit of an eye on what it is that you will probably do at that point in time. Sketch it out. Am I going to put, patio area here as you come out onto the lawn? Am I going to put a patio area here? And if so, would these planters work in this position? So that you're not, I suppose, discarding them completely, because you're in an urban garden. You have houses on both sides, as far as I can see, and you're going to need sort of raised planters anyway at some point in time in the garden. So why not do these now, and then, but have an eye on where you might position those in the future in the new garden. And I think, you might be able to get away without even moving them at that point, or even if you did move them, that you're not discarding them completely, and that they do fit into the new plan. So that's worth doing, as well as sketching out what you might want, even if it's not going to happen for a year or two. So to go back to the very first part of the question then, because we're going to do so much within these planters, we want to make sure that we get the compost right. And we've spoken about it several times before when we're talking about container gardening. It's quite easy to, I suppose, look at these and think that it's going to take a lot of compost to fill them, and it will, but to kind of go down the cheapest route and to go down the route of, you know, only putting in barely enough, I'd be of the opinion what we should do here is, okay, you have to have drainage holes in the bottom of these, obviously, both of them. There is obviously a drainage tank in the water tank, the black water tank already, but I would add another one, maybe two more on the sides and one on the other end. In the metal tank, I would add some drainage holes there, and then in the bottom, sort of 2 to 3 inches, I would go with, you know, pea gravel or some sort of stones, you know, round stones in the bottom, just to give that bit of drainage. And then I would fill them with good quality compost and go good here. Get your mix of topsoil, farmyard manure, and good quality compost. And by compost, I mean composted plant material rather than peat compost. And that's going to, and mix them, and that's going to give you a mix that will sustain these lot of plants that we're going to do there. And the other thing is that when in a year's time or 2 years' time, if these are going to be retained, you still have goodness, you still have good quality growing media. Or if they're not going to be retained, you still have good quality growing media that can be spread elsewhere in the garden or added into your flower beds. So it's never wasted. It's there. If you feel, as you questioned, would I put old plastic pots in the bottom to save on compost? You can absolutely do that, and I would do that at times, but only if I was doing it for the likes of bedding plants, where, you know, if I was putting in a really tall planter, which I have at the front door, I have a set of 3 pots. One of them is a really tall one. There is no benefit in having compost or growing media the whole way to the bottom in that. So I do have the bottom of that filled out with pots and other bits and pieces to bring up the level of, so that I only need to kind of fill the growing media by a third of the pot. And that's, you know, as I said, because that's all that's going in there, seasonal bedding, it's been changed regular, there's not a real high demand on it, so it's plenty of growing media for something like that. But what we're looking to do here is go with long-term plants that can either remain in these planters if they stay in the garden, or can be moved elsewhere in the garden if those planters are being taken out altogether. So a mix of topsoil, farmyard manure, and good quality compost. I would definitely be adding in biochar here. And now you have a growing media that's fit to grow anything. The other great benefit of using a mix such as that is that you're going to find it a lot easier to keep plants watered. If you just go with a peat-based potting mix or growing media in there, it's going to be very difficult to keep any plants, but especially if you're putting a lot of plants in there, keep them watered and keep them, keep them looking good when that media is going to dry out quite easily. So that's the mix. Drainage holes in the bottom, bit of pea gravel, and then your good quality mix up on top. In terms of plants then, to go to the screening piece first, I would be inclined here to not go for, as I said, a hard screen. So I'd be going for a softer screen. You can achieve that through some taller grasses, you know, the likes of a stipa, some of the miscanthus. So they're tall and feathery. They're given that sort of visual block, but without it being a hard screen. So it's a sort of a softer screen and looks a little bit more elegant as well. You could also put a trellis up on the back of it to raise it up, and you could put, you know, climbing plants on that, you know, the likes of a clematis, climbing rose. Climbing rose would give you obviously lovely color, nice smells. Jasmine would be another one, star jasmine, some of those. And on top of that, you could add in the likes of a sweet pea onto that. And so now you have screening and color, and, you know, it'll look well. And with the exception of sweet pea, all of the plants can be moved on afterwards. Then what we're looking to do is add in a combination of, you know, flower and food. And this is where you can get kind of a bit clever. So firstly, we're going to go with herbs. And use herbs, pick herbs that you're going to use in your kitchen. So what are you currently using? If you're using thyme, rosemary, sage, then one plant of each of those is fine. And the key with all herbs is to keep them clipped tightly all the time. So keep using the herbs, keep using the leaves. If you don't do that, they can get woody and they can get overgrown. You know, any of the herbs that you might want to grow, one single plant, keep them clipped regularly. And so they can sit in there. You can constantly get your fresh herbs from it right at your back door. And because you're in good quality compost, they're going to want to grow, but you're going to be able to keep them compact and keep them small and keep them tidy within those planters. Then I don't know if there's children in the house, but something like a strawberry, so maybe 1 or 2 strawberry plants planted to the front side that are capable of, I suppose, tumbling over the edge of the planter, whether we have it faced with the wood or not, tumbling over the edge of the planter, and you'll be able to pick your fruit directly from that. So a couple of those towards the front of the bed, a couple of herbs maybe mixed through the mid part of it, and these are, you know, these are for the 2 planters now. You can space it out however you choose. Your grasses then are going to give you that, you know, bit of screening or potentially a rose. Again, all of these can be moved afterwards. Then we can look at things like, you know, some of the nice perennials. So the likes of a dahlia, going to give you that high flower, and the fact that you're raised up as well is going to give you, you know, a nice impact there. They're going to be quite big as well. And towards the front, then you can certainly use things like the trailing bedding plants that you're going to get over the next month or 2. But you can also use some of the more tumbling or sort of creeping perennials, the likes of you know, geranium roseanne, for example, would sort of tumble down, or Ann Thompson would be another lovely one, would tumble down over the front of these planters, tumble down over your, you know, your wood or your front face of the planter, and it's going to give you that nice color. And again, it's a plant that can be used in the garden afterwards. So you're using stuff that can go directly back into the beds afterwards if that's what ends up being chosen. So you've loads of options. Just watch for your sizes. So tumbling plants towards the front. So tumbling plants towards the front, sort of more upright ones towards the middle, and then tall ones towards the back. I wouldn't rule out the possibility of putting in an apple tree in one of these. So you're going to look for an apple tree that can grow in a planter, and what you're really looking for here is, you know, something like a coronet apple. So again, if there's children in the house, they'll really appreciate this. It'll be a miniature apple that's specifically designed for growing in planters, and it will produce fruit, and a nice little bit of fruit actually, but from a really small footprint, and will be perfectly happy in, you know, in a planter. So you can go with that. Other possibilities then, because fruit, herbs and veg are all being mentioned as, you know, I like to grow veg and flowers, Christine says. So tomato plant, a tumbling tomato plant, don't put it out too early. Make sure it's warm in the summertime, but the fact that you're getting a lot of sun in that garden, you should be able to get nice tomatoes off that. So maybe 1, maximum 2 tumbling tomato plants to come out over the edge. So if you can picture that, you're going to have towards the front of your planter, the side that you can see, you're going to have your strawberries, maybe some of your flowers, the Ann Thompson, geranium and Ann Thompson, and some of those tumbling over the front, possibly your summer bedding tumbling over the front, and then your tomatoes, your strawberries, all tumbling out over the front. Directly behind that, you're going to have your herbs that you can constantly clip from, and you're going to have your sort of mid sort of range perennial plants with color. Maybe a tall rose or a good quality rose in there as well would be nice. And, you know, you're starting to mix all of them together now. At this point, Christine mentions that she has some veg and flower seeds. You should definitely be getting those started on your windowsill if you haven't done so already. Definitely get them started on your windowsill. Maybe on one of them, I'm not sure what veg seeds you have, but something like a carrot, you're not going to be able to grow a huge amount of them, but you can definitely get some in there. Any space you can find. And this is what I'm saying with the compost. If you put really good quality compost in there, you can absolutely stuff these beds with plants and you'll get away with it. Whereas if you fill them with, sort of a peat-based or an ordinary multi-purpose type compost, you're just not going to get enough out of it. So I would definitely big up on that at the start. But depending on what veg and flowers you have, get them started inside on your windowsill now, and then you can move them outside. As I say, I don't know which ones you have, but in terms of veg, then don't know if you eat it, but something like a Swiss chard, if you can get a single plant of that or 2 plants of that. The one I grow is called Bright Lights. When you sow the seed, it'll come up in yellows, reds, pinks. It's kind of it's an attractive looking plant. So it won't look out of place in the mid planting area of these planters, along with your perennials and so on. And it'll look attractive. So it's not, it's not like an ugly veg. You have to be careful, obviously, in terms of spacing. You're not going to put something like a cauliflower in because it's going to take up so much space and you're going to get so little off it. So what you're looking for is veg that you can plant in and sort of harvest outer leaves and pretty much get the whole year out of it. And that's what you're looking for. So again, with certain types of lettuce, you can do that. So again, I use a butterhead lettuce here, which is the one I particularly like to eat. I'll grow, 6 or 8 of those, and I'll continually pick the outer leaves. So you're always picking the outer leaves. Pick off 6 or 7 leaves off them, and then it'll grow again. You're tricking the plant into thinking, I haven't formed the head here yet. So you'll keep picking the outside leaves. It'll continue to generate new leaves, and you'll keep harvesting. And you get way longer out of it like that. So now you're getting some veg. Spinach is a good one in that it'll work quickly. You'll be able to sow it, harvest it, get it, sow in another little bit. But it's going to be quite, you're in terms of return for the space, you're not going to get as much out of it because you're going to have to constantly sow. But you can do that. Spring onions, again, I would drop in a few here and there, little plants here and there. You don't need a lot, but you'll be able to mix them through. But if you have enough of color and enough of variety in textures, heights, sizes, then it's going to look natural, and people won't even know that these are, they'll see the flower, but only on inspection they'll know this is also a food bed. So that's the sort of mix I would be going for there. Other possibilities, I suppose, the screening, if you wanted to go down this route, but it means that you won't be able to do much else in it. Something, again, like a bamboo is a possibility. Look beautiful. Will give you that screening, will give you that height without being a permanent big block. The thing with that is it's going to take over a little bit in there, even with it being a clumping type, you're looking for plants with maybe less demand than a bamboo. Bamboo will do well in there and will screen that area quite well. And will be able to go back out into your garden, so long as it's not a running type, we'll be able to go back out into the garden after the revamp. But just in terms of this planter, it might take too much from the, might need too much moisture, and might just take too much from the other plants that they might be able to get as established. Whereas if you're mixing in with, maybe a rose or climber, they're going to take less from the growing media, and so you'll be able to do a lot more in that bed. So you're looking to really extract every last inch out of this and get as much benefit as you can. Obviously, where it's going to be in the seated area then as well. I mentioned jasmine, I mentioned sweet pea, so you're getting nice scents in that area. Another possibility is to get lavender in there, and the lavender would do really well in a raised bed like that. So again, you're getting that beautiful flower, you're getting that nice color that's going to be near your seated area, and all in all, you're creating, I suppose, many effects from a limited size planter, but with the exception of maybe the sweet pea and a bit of summer bedding. If you went down that route, everything afterwards can be put out into the garden when the new design or the new idea comes to fruition. As I say, I would be getting one eye on that early though, because maybe these planters have a place in the long-term garden as well. And if they have, can they be positioned now and maybe not moved afterwards? That might make your life a lot easier, because when these are filled, they will be quite heavy. Not impossible to move, but quite heavy. So just make sure you get your drainage right. Make sure there is drainage holes. I would get the cladding on the outside to make it look like they're all the same planter, because they look very, very different. Two different materials, different sizes, different heights, different depths as well. But by cladding the front, you'll give the illusion of them being all one planter, and I think that would look really good. So I hope that helps. Your possibilities are endless. Like, really, you can do anything you want with this. You can go totally separate, put them in separate locations. You can go all flower in one and go all food crop in the other, herbs, veg. But I think combining them together will give you more of an impact. And it's possible to, I suppose, link food crops and, have beautiful flowers all in the same area. You're going to have, with the right mix, you're going to have nice butterflies and pollinators around as well. And I think the whole thing would just look well. You get the sense when you're sitting there in the evening time. And I suppose the whole thing in combination will give you a really nice effect. But your possibilities are endless, and it's nice to have something of that size to work with. Definitely fruit is a good option. You're not going to get huge amounts, but it's nice to have to add in that as some little bit of a combination. So Christine, I hope that helped. It's probably something that a lot of people do, and when you're in a garden like that, where you have an urban garden with sort of walls or fences on both sides, and you're trying to, I suppose, create a bit of a flow, that's why you need to come up a little bit with your planting, and that gives the illusion of it not being the rectangular shape that it actually is. And you can also, I saw, as you come out your doors, you have a lot of smaller planters, round planters on your steps, and they're all beautiful. And you can add some of them along the new water tank planter, for want of a better word, and that will change the look of it so that it's not this fixed rectangular shape. It'll soften the sides of it. So a tall round planter beside it, with some flowing grasses in it, maybe something like an agapanthus, giving you a nice flower, just something that changes the texture. So you're going from a sort of a rigid rectangular shape to a nice soft round shape, and that will help there. But you're getting different heights. Some of your smaller planters can be positioned around the bottom, and now you're getting sort of tree levels. You'll have your round planters towards the front, then your main planting level of the water tanks, and then your climbing or your taller plants toward the back, and now you have sort of tree levels. And for screening that area, it's going to give you like a bank of flower all in that area. And so from eye to way above your head height, you have plants and color, and I think that'll give you the screening that you're looking for without being too harsh and without blocking your neighbor's good advice over the wall. So I hope that helps, and hope it helps other people listening. It's a good question. It's an interesting question. It's always nice and it's good when a gardener sees something being thrown out like a water tank and to see the possibilities in it. And hopefully, Christine, you can work this into the new garden design over the coming years. Slightly short episode this week. Next week's episode is what to plant in April. We've had an extremely wet, we're last week of March here. I don't think we've had as wet a March in a long time. It has been really, really wet. February, as always happens, February gave the illusion of spring was here, and it was warm and it was dry and everything was starting to get going. To be honest, there's been next to no growth through the month of March. Definitely, it's so wet now. You're not, and it's still raining. It's still raining today. It's forecast rain over the next weekend. So it's, the chances for getting out sowing in the next sort of week or 10 days are limited as well. So hold tight on your direct sowing, and certainly continue your sowing inside, your successional sowing. Keep doing all of that. But we'll go through the full list next week of what you can be doing, and it'll be very, very relatable to how the weather has gone over the last month and what's sort of in the pipeline for the next week or 10 days. It changes, like, as I say, last year on the first sort of Friday of every month, we did what to sow this month in terms of vegetables and flowers. And we're going to do it again, but it's because it is different every year. You know, some years you'll get a good February, good March in a row, and then April comes cool, and so you need to be able to adapt and react to that. So yeah, it's definitely a different March this year, but still lots we can be doing, and certainly lots to be sown. So that's what we'll be covering in next week's episode. So that's been this week's episode. Thanks for listening, and until the next time, happy gardening.